My name is Claire Jensen. I'm 32 years old, a freelance illustrator living in Portland. People see my art and say it's full of warmth, but they don't know it comes from a place I buried 20 years ago. The day my parents abandoned me at a train station and never looked back. They called it a lesson in independence. I called it the day I stopped being a daughter. Before I tell you how I turned that moment into my quiet revenge, how I found my voice in a courtroom they never expected me to walk into, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit subscribe to follow this journey. Because once you hear what really happened, you'll understand why some scars never fade. But they do sharpen. I was 12 the morning my parents told me we were going on a family trip to Chicago. It was strange from the beginning. David, my father, was whistling while packing the car, a sound I'd never heard without the bitter scent of whiskey following it. Lorraine, my mother, made sandwiches and smiled at me like I was a guest in her house, not her child. I wanted to believe this trip meant something. That maybe, just maybe, they were trying to change. We lived in a small town outside Madison, Wisconsin. The kind of place where everyone waved but no one asked what really happened behind closed doors. My older brother Ryan had football practice that day, so it would just be the three of us. I clutched that hope like it was a gift, not knowing what was coming. The drive was quiet at first. Dad had the radio on low, some classic rock station humming along with the highway. Mom asked me about school, testing my knowledge on state capitals like it was a game. Every wrong answer earned a click of Dad's tongue. Even a fifth grader would know that, he muttered once. I laughed nervously, even when my stomach began to twist. When we reached Union Station, I was overwhelmed. People rushing, the noise, the announcements echoing off the high ceiling. It was the biggest building I'd ever been in. Dad pulled up near the front entrance, got out and opened my door. "Come on," he said cheerfully. "Let's stretch our legs." We stepped into the station and they led me toward a large marble column near the middle of the main hall. "Wait here," Mom said, brushing my hair behind my ear. "We're going to move the car and grab lunch. We'll be back in 15. Can I come?" I asked. The fear in my voice must have slipped out. Dad laughed. "What are you, 5? Just 15 minutes. You'll be fine." Mom kissed my forehead too quickly. "Don't move," she said and turned. I stood there, watching them disappear into the crowd, my backpack tight against my shoulders, my feet suddenly too heavy to move. The station clock read 12:17. I watched the hands tick past 15 minutes. Then 30. Then 45. The people around me blurred. My legs ached. My throat tightened. I began scanning every person, every passing car through the glass windows. At 1:23, I saw our blue Ford sedan drive past the station slowly. I ran toward the exit, waving both hands, heart pounding. I saw my parents in the front seat. Dad grinned when he saw me, a cruel kind of amusement on his face. Mom rolled down her window and shouted words that still echo inside me 2 decades later. "Let's see how she finds her way home." They laughed. And then they were gone. I stood frozen on the sidewalk, the noise of the city roaring in my ears. No phone. No wallet. No clue how to get home. Just a 12-year-old girl abandoned 3 hours from everything she'd ever known. And somehow that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. I didn't move for a long time after the car disappeared. People rushed past me in every direction, completely unaware that my entire world had just collapsed. I kept expecting them to turn around. Maybe it was a twisted joke. Maybe they'd come back laughing, saying I'd learned my lesson. But the seconds turned into minutes, and the minutes into an hour, and they never came back. I walked back into the station, feet dragging, vision blurred. The grand hall that had once seemed impressive now felt like a maze I couldn't escape. I hovered near the same pillar, scared to leave in case they came back. My stomach growled. My chest ached. I looked at the few dollar bills I had crumpled in my pocket. 7 total. Not enough for a train ticket. Not even enough for a decent meal. Every adult I passed looked too busy, too focused. My parents had always warned me not to talk to strangers. They told me stories of bad people who snatched kids who didn't listen. But they never told me what to do when your own parents were the ones who left. I was walking in circles, trying not to cry, when a voice stopped me. Honey, are you lost? I looked up and saw a woman with silver-streaked hair, red-framed glasses, and a floral scarf tied around her neck. She crouched down so we were eye level. Her eyes were kind. Not overly sweet, not suspicious, just steady and calm. Where are your parents? She asked gently. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. She waited, not pushing, just letting me breathe. They went to park the car. I lied, my voice thin and cracked. Her expression didn't change, but she didn't believe me. I think she already knew. When was that? She asked. I looked at the clock. Nearly 3 hours had passed. My eyes filled with tears, and the truth came tumbling out. They left me. They left me here. They drove away. She didn't gasp or shake her head or question me. She just placed a soft hand on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now. We'll figure this out." She introduced herself as Janet and led me to a quiet office tucked near the back of the station. She gave me a bottle of water and sat across from me while I tried to explain everything. I told her about the trip, the promise of lunch, the car pulling away. I told her about the words my mother shouted. Her expression grew darker with every sentence. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked. "Claire. Claire Jensen. And how old are you?" 12. She nodded, stood up, and walked out of the room. A few minutes later, a security guard named Marcus appeared. He was tall and broad but had a soft voice and kind eyes. He asked a few more questions, then made a phone call. The words, "We need to call the police," made my heart freeze. I thought I was in trouble. I thought maybe they'd lock me up for saying the wrong thing. I didn't understand that I was the one who'd been wronged. Within the hour, a police officer named Teresa Ramirez arrived. She listened to my story, took notes, and gently wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. She called the number I gave her, our home phone in Madison, but there was no answer. "They might still be driving," I said, clinging to the last thread of hope. Teresa didn't respond right away. But her silence told me everything. We rode in her cruiser to the nearest police station. I sat in a waiting room with buzzing fluorescent lights and posters on the wall about child safety. The coffee in the corner smelled burnt. I held the blanket tightly, as if it could keep me from disappearing. That's when Laura Donovan walked in. She introduced herself as someone from Child Protective Services. She had a calm presence, like a teacher who'd seen it all but still cared. She asked if I felt safe at home. I said I didn't know. She asked if this had ever happened before. I nodded slowly. "Not like this," I said, "but things were always different. Unpredictable." I didn't know the words then. Emotional abuse, neglect, trauma. I just knew that I never felt wanted. Not really. Laura said I would be placed in emergency foster care for the night until they could figure out what to do. I nodded numbly. My mind couldn't process any of it. This was not supposed to happen. I was 12. This was supposed to be the age of slumber parties and school projects, not police stations and strangers deciding where I would sleep. By nightfall, I found myself at a small house on a quiet street. The Williams family had a daughter around my age named Alicia. She let me borrow pajamas and a toothbrush. I didn't say much. I couldn't eat the spaghetti they served. Everything felt distant and unreal. I laid in a bed that wasn't mine, in a house that wasn't mine, and stared at the ceiling. The image of that blue Ford driving away played in my mind over and over like a broken reel. They had left me. Not forgotten. Not lost. Left. On purpose. And the worst part wasn't being alone in that city. It was realizing that no one, not a teacher, not a neighbor, not even my own brother, had ever noticed how much I didn't belong in that house. Not until I vanished from it. I didn't know what time it was when the crowd started to blur. I just knew that the numbers on the giant station clock didn't lie. 15 minutes had become 30. 30 became 60. Every passing tick was another second I stayed frozen in place, waiting for something, anything to prove this wasn't real. That they hadn't really left me. That this was just one more twisted lesson that would end with them grinning as they came back around the corner. But they didn't. The hum of voices grew louder in my ears. The bright natural light pouring through the glass ceiling had started to shift, casting longer shadows across the stone floor. I remember a man brushing past me with a leather briefcase, muttering something under his breath when I didn't move out of his way fast enough. My legs wouldn't cooperate. My brain felt like it was moving through syrup. Low. Icky. People around me were laughing, shouting, hugging. The rush of trains coming and going. Families greeting one another with open arms. And there I was. A 12-year-old girl wearing a too big hoodie and scuffed sneakers, standing next to a column like a forgotten bag. The money in my pocket was $7. I had counted it twice already. It was my entire allowance from the last month, carefully saved for souvenir keychains or a funnel cake if we ever went to the amusement park Dad had promised. But now, those 7 crumpled bills were my only lifeline in a city I didn't know, with no one looking for me. I couldn't stop the thoughts. What if I tried to leave the station and got lost? What if someone bad found me before someone good did? What if they had never meant to come back? The worst thought was the one I tried not to think. What if they really did believe this was love? I had just started pacing again when I felt someone watching me. I looked up and met eyes with a woman standing a few feet away, near the information booth. She wasn't staring. Not the way strangers sometimes look at a kid who's crying in public, unsure if they should intervene. She was just observing, quietly, patiently, like she knew not to spook me. She had silver hair tied into a loose braid, red glasses perched on her nose, and wore a scarf with small faded birds on it. Her hands were gentle-looking, the kind that probably folded napkins perfectly and baked cookies from scratch. She tilted her head and stepped forward slowly. "Honey, are you lost?" she asked, her voice low and careful. I should have said no. I should have turned away. Every rule drilled into my head about strangers screamed at me to shut down. But I didn't. I looked at her and something cracked. Not like glass, but like ice finally giving way to a softer current underneath. I opened my mouth. No words came. She crouched to my level and waited. Finally I whispered. My parents were going to park the car. They were getting food. When was that? I looked at the clock again. 3 hours. I didn't say it out loud. Just shook my head, and the tears came with the movement. She didn't rush. She didn't scold or judge. She put one hand gently on my shoulder and said, "You're safe now. Let's go find a quiet place to talk." Her name was Janet. She led me to a small staff room near the security office. There was a water cooler, a table stacked with old magazines, and a window that looked out over the tracks. She handed me a plastic cup of water and sat across from me like she had nowhere more important to be. I told her everything, halting at first, then faster like words had been locked behind my ribs and now flooded out. A trip. The lesson. The words my mother shouted. How they laughed. The moment I realized they weren't coming back. Janet didn't interrupt. She didn't react with pity or anger, just a growing sense of quiet concern. When I finished, she stood and stepped into the hallway. She returned with a tall man in a dark blue shirt with a badge on his chest. His name was Marcus. Station security. He bent down, introduced himself, and asked if he could ask me a few questions. I nodded, clutching the cup of water like it was a lifeline. Marcus's voice was deep but soft. He asked me about where I lived, my parents' names, our home phone number, and if I had any relatives nearby. I shook my head. All of our family was out east, in Massachusetts, and we hadn't spoken to them in years. He stepped aside to make a phone call. I heard the words from across the room. "Yes, I think we need to call the police." My heart jumped into my throat. I thought for sure I'd done something wrong. Maybe I had exaggerated. Maybe they'd call my parents and I'd get in trouble for making a scene. Maybe they'd come back furious, drag me home, and make sure I never spoke to anyone about this again. But no one yelled. No one told me I was a burden. Instead, 20 minutes later, a police officer named Teresa Ramirez arrived. She had brown eyes, a bun pulled tight behind her head, and a notebook already in hand. She introduced herself and asked if she could talk to me in private. I nodded. She listened to everything again. More details this time. The kind of questions adults only ask when they believe you. What time did you arrive? What color was the car? What were your parents wearing? How much money did they leave you with? She paused when I said $7. Teresa took notes quietly. Then, without warning, she wrapped a blanket around my shoulders like I was cold, even though I wasn't. It was the first time I felt remotely okay all day. We went to the local precinct. It wasn't like I imagined a police station would be. There were no scary cells or shouting criminals. Just fluorescent lights, the low hum of conversation, and a vending machine that buzzed in the corner. They tried calling the number I gave again. No answer. Maybe they're still driving, I said softly, but Teresa didn't agree. She just smiled sadly and handed me a cup of hot chocolate. By the time someone from Child Services arrived, it was already dark outside. Laura Donovan. Mid-40s, curls, soft eyes. She introduced herself and told me she worked with kids who needed help when things went wrong. She said wrong very carefully, like she didn't want to say the word abuse until I said it first. I didn't say it. I didn't need to. The bruise wasn't on my skin. It was behind my eyes. She asked me 100 questions. Had they ever hit me? No, not really. Did I feel safe at home? Paused too long. Had they ever left me before? Not like this, I said. But they did other things. Birthday promises broken. Punishment that felt like games. Being locked out of the house for character building. She nodded, writing something in her folder. You'll stay with a foster family tonight, Claire. Just until we figure things out. I don't remember the car ride to the Williams house. Just the sound of the turn signal clicking and my breath fogging the window. When we pulled into the driveway, it looked like any other house. Porch light, a potted plant, a welcome mat. The front door opened, and a woman with braids and a wide smile stood waiting. You must be Claire, she said gently. Diane Williams. Her husband Robert stood behind her, tall and quiet. Their daughter Alicia peeked from the hallway. She looked unsure, like I was a guest from another planet. I barely spoke during dinner. The spaghetti tasted fine, but I couldn't swallow much. Everything inside me felt too tight. Diane tried to make conversation. Robert asked what I liked to draw. Alicia asked if I had any siblings. I nodded, said Ryan. And that was all. Alicia brought me to the guest room. She handed me pajamas with pink stars and a toothbrush in its packaging. Thanked her. Closed the door. And stared at the ceiling for hours. I didn't cry. Not then. Not after everything. The tears had run out somewhere between the station steps and the police station waiting room. I just laid there, remembering my parents' laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Remembering the way the car turned the corner and didn't stop. Remembering how easy it was for them to disappear. And realizing maybe for the first time that no matter what happened next, I couldn't go back. Not just because I wasn't welcome, but because there was no longer a place to return to. 3 days after I was left at the station, I sat in a narrow hallway lined with gray chairs and buzzing overhead lights, waiting for a meeting that would define the rest of my childhood. My knees bounced without my permission. Every time the door at the end of the hallway opened, I flinched like a fire alarm had gone off. Laura Donovan sat beside me, calm as ever, flipping through papers in her folder. You don't have to say anything today if you don't want to, she reminded me for the 3rd time. Just being here is enough. I wasn't sure what enough meant anymore. The emergency hearing had been called after Child Protective Services failed to reach my parents for 2 days straight. They'd finally picked up late Sunday night, after a 3rd voicemail from Laura warned them the police were preparing to file abandonment charges. Lorraine answered with her usual clipped voice, pretending to be surprised. We were going to call. We just wanted Claire to learn something important. That sentence played in my head like a broken song. Something important. Apparently I wasn't that thing. Monday afternoon arrived with a kind of heavy, suffocating heat that made even indoor air feel thick. I wore borrowed clothes from Alicia, a denim skirt and a pale blue t-shirt that didn't quite fit. Laura had helped me wash my hair the night before. Diane had pressed the clothes. I looked like a kid going to a school recital, not a girl being paraded into a room to confront the people who abandoned her. "They're already inside," Laura said as she stood and smoothed her skirt. My legs felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. I followed her into a conference room where the walls were blank and the windows didn't open. A long table stretched down the middle. On one side sat 2 women from family court and Laura's supervisor. On the other, my parents. I almost didn't recognize them. David Jensen looked older than I remembered. His usual pressed polo shirt was wrinkled. The skin under his eyes sagged like he hadn't slept. Lorraine sat next to him, hands folded in her lap, a soft shade of lipstick on, a light blue blouse buttoned all the way up. She looked like she was sitting down for tea. Beside them sat a man in a suit with a briefcase and an I've 1,000 times expression. Their attorney. "Claire," my mother said, standing a little too quickly. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Laura gestured for me to sit on the far side of the table. "Please take your seats," the woman from family court said firmly. For a moment no one spoke. Then the attorney cleared his throat and began reading a prepared statement. "My clients, David and Lorraine Jensen, deeply regret the situation that has unfolded. Their decision was made with the intention of promoting growth, independence, and real-world experience in their daughter. While they acknowledge the situation escalated, their actions were never intended as abandonment, but as an unconventional parenting method rooted in concern for Claire's emotional resilience." Blink. Emotional resilience. Was that what they called it now? He went on describing what he called the experiment. How they allegedly circled the station after 20 minutes and didn't see me, so they assumed I'd figured things out. How they returned home waiting for a phone call from a police station or from a kind stranger's phone. How they believed I'd step up to the challenge. "Children today," David interjected at one point. "They're so coddled. We were trying to teach her to stand on her own. You left a 12-year-old girl in an unfamiliar city with no phone, no ID, and $7. Laura's supervisor replied flatly. "She's exaggerating how little money she had," Lorraine added, her voice firm but defensive. "There are phones everywhere. She could have called collect." My fingers curled under the table. No apology. No remorse. They believed they were right. I felt something inside me shift. Not anger. Not even grief. Just a sharp, clean break from whatever threads of loyalty had remained. Like a paper snapping along its fold. The family liaison turned to me. "Claire, would you like to respond?" My throat burned. I wanted to hide. But instead I looked straight at them. "You didn't forget me," I said quietly. "You left me. On purpose. You looked me in the eye and drove away." Lorraine blinked rapidly. David's jaw clenched. "You didn't teach me anything about independence. You taught me how to disappear. You taught me that love could be withdrawn like a punishment. And that nothing I did was ever going to be enough." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was devastating. Laura put a hand lightly on my back. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stared at the people who used to be my parents and felt, for the first time, entirely separate from them. The court liaison reviewed my statement, the police report, the therapist's initial notes, and the Williams observation report from my emergency foster stay. "Based on this documentation," she said, "we'll recommend temporary placement with a certified foster family until further review can be completed. The court will also order mandatory parenting classes and psychological evaluation for both David and Lorraine Jensen." "Wait," David started. "Do not interrupt," the liaison said sharply. "And Claire," she turned back to me. "Do you want to return to your parents' custody at this time?" I opened my mouth. My voice didn't shake. "No." The shock on their faces landed like thunder. "You don't get to decide that," David said, rising from his chair. "Actually, she does," the liaison replied. Lorraine stood too. "We're her family. This is absurd." "You abandoned her," Laura's supervisor said. You signed away your right to outrage the moment you left her alone in a train station. They didn't understand. They weren't sorry. They just wanted control back. But something had changed. I wasn't the scared kid crying by a marble column anymore. I was a witness now. To their choices. And their consequences. The meeting ended with details about my continued placement, upcoming court dates and evaluations. As they packed up, Lorraine tried one more time to approach me. "Claire," she whispered. "You're overreacting. We were trying to abandon someone who trusted you," I interrupted, standing from my chair. "That's what you taught me. And I'm done learning from you." I walked out of the room before anyone else. Laura followed me down the hallway, her steps slow and steady. "You did incredibly well," she said. I nodded but didn't answer. My chest was tight. My eyes burned. But the thing I felt most wasn't pain. It was clarity. That night, I stayed up late at the Williams house, sitting in bed with a notebook Diane had given me. The pages were blank. I picked up the pen and began to draw. Not a person. Not a place. Just shapes. Motion. Fragments. My hands moved like they'd been waiting to create something true. The next morning, Laura showed up early. "You'll be going to stay with a long-term foster family," she said. "They've been certified for over 10 years. No kids of their own, but they've fostered a dozen. The Rivers family. Marcus and Ellen. They live just outside the city." I didn't know what to say. I didn't trust easily. But I had nothing left to lose. We drove in silence, the morning sun slanting through the windshield. The roads blurred into suburbs, then neighborhoods, then a quiet street lined with maple trees and flower beds. When we pulled into the driveway, a woman with short dark curls opened the door. She had a warm smile and a soft linen dress. A man stepped out behind her, tall and lean, paint on his forearms. "You must be Claire," the woman said. "We're so glad you're here," the man added. I stood on the threshold, backpack heavy, heart unsure. But something about the way they looked at me felt different. Not pity. Not judgment. Just open space. Beginning. Ellen Rivers smelled like chamomile and old wood. The first time she hugged me, it was brief, careful, and warm like sunlight on the floor. She didn't press. She didn't ask questions. She just held the door open wide and told me I could leave my shoes wherever I liked. Their house didn't feel like a foster home. Felt lived in. Not staged. Little messy. 2 cats roamed freely and a wind chime by the back porch door clicked softly every time the breeze rolled through. Marcus Rivers greeted me in paint-stained jeans. He was a high school art teacher who spent his summers painting murals for community centers and abandoned libraries. His fingers were speckled with green and gold. "We believe kids deserve rooms that look like someone wanted them there," he told me gently. "Yours is upstairs." My room had pale yellow walls, a window seat with a faded cushion, and 3 empty bookshelves. There was a desk tucked beside the radiator and a lamp with a ceramic base shaped like a tree. There was no locked closet. No rules taped to the dresser. No sign that I'd be rotated out in a week. "We want you to feel safe," Ellen said that night as she handed me a pair of clean pajamas folded with care. "You don't owe us anything, Claire. Just rest." Rest wasn't something I knew how to do. That first week, I moved like a ghost through their home. I ate in small bites, folded my laundry 3 times before putting it away, and kept a bag packed under the bed, just in case. They never commented on it. Never asked. Ellen noticed but didn't pry. She just left an extra journal on my nightstand every couple of days. Laura came to visit on the 3rd day. She brought good news and bad. The good news. My case was being prioritized. The bad. My parents were cooperating barely. They had hired a better lawyer and were now claiming I had run off during the trip. That I misunderstood everything. That I had mental instability. From being too sheltered and sensitive. "Are they saying I made it up?" I asked, blinking slowly. Laura sighed. "They're saying you misinterpreted their intent. That they came back and you were gone. Marcus, who had been listening from the doorway, spoke gently. Gaslighting. It's what people do when they can't accept responsibility. That word stuck to my skin like ash. Gaslighting. A new word for something I'd always known but couldn't name. I started therapy again, this time with a woman named Dr. Caldwell. She wore neutral sweaters and spoke like each sentence had been run through a filter of gentleness. She never looked surprised, even when I told her about the time my mother locked me outside in the rain for forgetting manners, or how my father made me stand in the basement for hours in the dark because I was too sensitive for the real world. You don't seem surprised, I told her after one particularly long silence. Because you're not the only one, she replied. There are more of you than you think. School, I said little. I was placed in a summer tutoring program to catch up on missed time. I didn't make friends. Didn't want to. Most of the other kids whispered about me anyway. Some knew. Most guessed. But in art class I was quiet and focused. I worked on one sketch for over a week. Lines and shadows and harsh strokes of charcoal. When Marcus saw it, he didn't say anything at first. Then he said, "Your hand remembers what your mouth hasn't learned how to say." One evening after dinner, Ellen and I sat on the porch as the sky turned pink and gold. I asked her why she and Marcus didn't have kids of their own. She smiled bittersweet. We tried, she said simply. But eventually we realized maybe our family was already waiting. Not in a crib, but somewhere else. I stared at the sunset, thinking of how strange it was that people who didn't know me had chosen to care. How people who had raised me had chosen not to. You don't have to call us anything, she added, as if sensing my thoughts. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not anything. But we're here. If you want us to be. The following month, the court assigned a guardian ad litem to my case. Her name was Ms. Finley. She was tall, older, and wore leather boots even in the heat. She interviewed me in my room, asking me questions no adult had ever cared enough to ask before. What does safe feel like to you? What happens in your body when you hear your mother's voice? If you could choose your future, what would it look like? I told her slowly, carefully. She took notes. Didn't interrupt. She looked around my room and asked about the paintings on the wall. One of them was a birdcage with the door open. What do you think's inside? She asked. Nothing, I replied. Not anymore. Not anymore. By the end of the summer, the court hearing had been set. August 12th. I would be 13 in 6 days. One evening, while brushing my hair in the mirror, I stared at my own reflection and realized the girl in the glass wasn't Claire Jensen anymore. Not really. Claire Jensen was the name they gave me. The name they used when they wanted to control me. The name printed on the report card my father ripped in half because of 1 A-. I walked downstairs that night and found Ellen reading on the couch. I stood silently until she looked up. I want to change my name, I said. She set the book aside. To what? I hesitated, then whispered. Megan. It wasn't random. It was a name I'd once given to a character in a comic I never finished. The kind of girl who got away from it all. Who built a home from scraps and defended her own peace. Ellen smiled. Megan Rivers, she said softly. It suits you. Not yet, I added. Just Megan. For now. The next morning, I found a note on my door in Ellen's careful handwriting. Megan, your breakfast is in the oven. Coffee's on. And there's more paint in the garage if you need it. Lovey. The first time someone called me Megan out loud was Marcus. We were in the car on the way to the art supply store. He handed me a sketch pad through the open window and said, Here you go, Megan. I didn't correct him. Felt right. The last night before court I couldn't sleep. Dr. Caldwell had prepared me for everything. She walked me through the kinds of questions they'd ask. What my parents might try to say. How to breathe when I felt the old panic trying to claw its way up my throat. But nothing could prepare me for the moment when I'd have to face them again. Not on paper. Not through lawyers. Face to face. I laid awake staring at the ceiling, my hands clutched around a pillow. The air feeling too thick. I could hear Max, the river's old tabby, purring somewhere near the foot of my bed. When morning came, I dressed in quiet defiance. A dark green shirt, jeans, and my hair tied back in a braid. Marcus drove. Ellen held my hand at every red light. We entered the courthouse through a side entrance. Laura met us at the door. Dr. Caldwell stood nearby, a quiet pillar of strength. The courtroom wasn't large. No jury. No cameras. Just benches, a wooden table, and a judge in a high-backed chair. My parents sat on the opposite side. Lorraine looked polished, her blouse crisp, makeup subtle. David had trimmed his beard, wearing a navy blazer over a white shirt. Their lawyer sat between them, murmuring strategy. They didn't see me at first. Then they did. And Lorraine's face broke, just a little. David stared. I didn't smile. I took my seat beside Laura and waited. This time there would be no laughter. No cars pulling away. No marble columns hiding tears. This time I had a voice. And they were about to hear it. The courtroom was smaller than I imagined. Somehow that made it worse. Everything felt too close, too still. No background noise to hide my breathing. No distance between me and the people who broke me in ways words could never fully explain. The walls were beige, the kind of color chosen to make everyone forget they had emotions. Even the clock on the wall ticked so softly it felt like it was holding its breath. I sat between Laura and my court-appointed guardian, Finley. On my other side was Dr. Caldwell, not as my therapist today, but as someone allowed to be present for emotional support. The judge entered through a plain wooden door at the back of the room. She was older, with gray streaks in her dark hair and sharp eyes that seemed to weigh every inch of the space. Her name was Judge Ellison. I'd heard it before. Laura said she was tough but fair. My parents sat across from me. David straightened his blazer 3 times in the first minute. Lorraine clutched a tissue in her left hand like it was part of her performance. Neither of them looked at me directly. Only their lawyer did. The hearing began with introductions. Judge Ellison asked for the summary of the case, and Laura presented it clearly. Her voice steady, not overly dramatic, just factual. Minor child Claire Jensen, age 12, was left unsupervised for over 3 hours at Union Station in Chicago on June 10th. Parents claimed they intended a brief separation as a lesson in independence. Child was not provided with adequate means of communication, identification, or resources. The child was later taken into protective custody and placed in emergency foster care. She handed the judge a folder. The photos inside weren't of bruises or broken bones. They were worse. They were records of statements of abandonment, of silence so sharp it left invisible scars. The judge flipped through the documents and paused. We are not here today to argue semantics. We are here to determine whether what happened was neglect, abuse, or simply poor judgment with consequences. Your Honor, their lawyer stood, adjusting his sleeves. We acknowledge that emotions have clouded this matter. My clients, David and Lorraine Jensen, regret the distress caused to their daughter. But intent matters. They did not harm her. They did not leave her forever. They made a calculated decision. Unorthodox, yes, but not malicious. They were attempting to teach responsibility, not cause trauma. My fingernails dug into my palm under the table. Judge Ellison turned to my parents. Do either of you wish to speak directly? David cleared his throat. We were concerned about Claire's lack of maturity. She's always been, well, sensitive, emotional. We thought. So you left her, the judge interrupted. In a major city. With no supervision. Lorraine leaned forward. We were nearby. We watched for a while from the car. When she wasn't where we left her, we assumed she'd gone to a police officer or used a phone. We expected her to come home. That was the lesson. Was there ever a plan to check on her if she didn't return? Finley asked. We planned to call later that evening, David replied. But you didn't. He faltered. We got distracted. We didn't want to interrupt what we assumed was part of her growth. You assumed, Judge Ellison repeated. You gambled with your child's safety for a philosophical lesson. With all due respect, their lawyer jumped in. It's not uncommon for parents to try creative disciplinary techniques. Finley didn't let it slide. Creative parenting doesn't mean negligent parenting. If a stranger had done the same thing, left a 12-year-old girl alone in a public space with no money, no phone, and no supervision, would we call that a lesson or abandonment? The silence was colder than anything I'd ever felt. Judge Ellison nodded. Thank you. Now I'd like to hear from Claire. I knew it was coming. Practiced. Over and over. But my throat still closed. Laura gave me a look. Not pressure. Just presence. I stood up. My hands were shaking, but I didn't hide them. I used to think there was something wrong with me. I began, my voice barely above a whisper. Like if I could just be better, if I was smarter or quieter or more like my brother, they'd love me the way they were supposed to. Lorraine shifted in her seat. David looked down at the table. When they told me we were going to Chicago, I thought it was a good day. I thought maybe they were trying. I even packed snacks. I remember thinking this is the first time it's just us. Maybe we'll laugh together. Maybe I'll matter. Paused, breath shaking. But when they left me at that station, when they laughed and said, "Let's see how she finds her way home," something broke. I waited. I thought they'd come back. Every second I stood there I hoped. But they didn't. I looked at the judge. I wasn't taught a lesson that day. I was abandoned. And I don't want to go back to people who think love is something you have to earn by surviving their games. I sat down. The room was silent. Even the clock seemed to have stopped ticking. Judge Ellison leaned back in her chair. Thank you, Claire. She looked at the reports again. This court finds sufficient evidence of emotional neglect and endangerment. Claire will remain in protective custody. David and Lorraine Jensen will be required to undergo full psychological evaluation, parenting rehabilitation, and may petition for supervised visitation after 6 months, provided they comply. David stood. She's our daughter. She belongs with us. You had her trust, the judge said calmly. And you left her on a train platform. Parenting is not ownership. It is responsibility. And you failed it. Lorraine's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time, or good acting. It didn't matter anymore. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, Ellen and Marcus waited. When they saw me, Ellen opened her arms, but didn't rush forward. She waited just like the first day. This time I didn't hesitate. I walked straight into her arms and stayed there. Outside the sun was high. I was still 12. But I was no longer the girl they left behind. I was the girl who spoke. The girl who chose herself. After the hearing, time did something strange. It moved in both directions. One part of me felt like I could finally breathe, like a tight rope had been cut from around my chest. The other part stayed frozen in the courtroom, reliving every word my parents said. Every denial, every excuse, every moment they tried to twist my pain into something they could justify. When we got back to the Rivers house, Ellen made lemon tea and left it on my nightstand without saying anything. Marcus put a note in my sketchbook. You were brave. You were right. I didn't answer either of them that night. Instead, I laid in bed staring at the ceiling while the weight of everything settled over me like dust. Low. Invisible. Suffocating. The next day, I woke to a voice humming softly in the hallway. Ellen. She hummed when she baked, when she folded laundry, when she fed the cats. It wasn't loud, but it filled the silence in a way that made me feel less hollow. I followed the sound down to the kitchen and sat at the table without saying a word. She didn't look surprised. She just poured me a mug of warm tea and slid a slice of toast across the table. We're glad you're here, she said. Not just because you need a place. Because you're you. I didn't cry. I just nodded. School resumed a week later. I entered 7th grade in a new school district, with a new name still whispered like a secret inside my mind. Claire was gone. Not on paper yet, but in spirit. Megan was the name I signed on the back of my sketchbooks. Megan was the name I told the therapist when she asked who I saw when she held up a mirror. In the first few weeks of school, I didn't talk much. But there was one girl in art class who noticed me. Her name was Ivy. She had short hair dyed purple at the ends and wore mismatched socks on purpose. She didn't ask questions the way most kids did. She just sat next to me during group projects and handed me gum before class started. "You draw like you're trying to get out of somewhere," she said one day while watching me sketch. "Maybe I am. Are you winning?" "Thought about that." "Not yet." She didn't press further. Instead, she showed me one of her drawings. A maze filled with staircases that led nowhere. She didn't say it, but I knew she understood. Outside of school, the court process dragged on. My parents appealed the judge's decision twice. Both times their petitions were denied. The court-ordered therapy they attended was minimal effort at best. Dr. Caldwell told me they showed up, signed the sheet, and left early. "You're not missing anything," she assured me. In November I turned 13. Ellen baked a chocolate cake with blue frosting. Marcus gave me a new set of watercolors. Ivy came over for the first time and brought me a handmade bracelet that spelled out "Mar" in tiny glass beads. When I opened the last box, I found a folder inside. "Adoption papers." "We don't want to pressure you," Ellen said. "This is your decision. We love you no matter what name you choose." The choice should have been simple. But names carry weight. Jensen was a name that made people in Madison nod with recognition. It was the name on my old school records, my birth certificate, my medical forms. But it was also the name that left me at Union Station. The name that told a judge I needed to be broken to be strong. Megan Rivers, on the other hand, was a name no one had ever used against me. It was quiet, strong, chosen. "Do you think I'd be erasing who I was?" I asked Dr. Caldwell during our next session. "You're not erasing," she said. "You're reclaiming." By the end of the week I signed the forms. Not in pencil, in ink. The adoption hearing was scheduled for early January. The morning of the hearing, I sat in the courthouse wearing a green dress and a denim jacket Ivy had decorated with tiny embroidered stars. Ellen held my hand. Marcus squeezed my shoulder. Laura waited outside the courtroom with a thermos of hot cocoa and a folder full of documents. This courtroom was different. No defense team. No arguments. Just a judge, a notary, and a decision that would change the course of my life. When the judge looked up and asked, "Do you want to become Megan Rivers legally and permanently?" I said yes before she finished the question. When she asked, "Do you understand that this means the Jensens will no longer have parental rights?" I said, "They gave those up a long time ago." After the gavel hit the desk, Ellen cried. Marcus smiled in that quiet, proud way of his. Ivy took a photo of us outside the building and posted it with the caption, "Welcome home." That night, back at the house, I stood in front of the mirror and whispered the name to myself. Megan. Megan Rivers. A girl with a past she didn't run from. A girl with a name she chose herself. It was a Tuesday morning when the first envelope arrived. Plain. Hand-addressed. I found it on the kitchen counter between the cereal box and the stack of bills. Ellen must have brought in the mail before work. I froze the moment I saw the handwriting. Unmistakably hers. Lorraine Jensen. I didn't open it. I carried it upstairs and stared at it for hours, the edges curling slightly under my fingers as I tried to decide if I even wanted to read it. Marcus came home around noon and found me in the hallway outside my bedroom door, still holding it. "Do you want me to take it?" he asked softly. "No," I said. I walked to the backyard, sat on the porch swing, and peeled the envelope open with shaking hands. The letter was 4 pages long. The first sentence. I don't know how to begin. Then it spiraled the way I expected. Explanations disguised as apologies. Claims of misunderstanding. A paragraph about how she and David thought they were doing what was best. How I had always been so dramatic, so hard to reach. How they never imagined it would escalate to this. She used that word, escalate, as if what they did was an accident that got out of hand, not a choice they made with their own hands on the wheel. The last paragraph said, "We miss you. We love you. We hope someday you'll understand we did our best." I folded the letter, placed it back into the envelope, and slid it into the kitchen trash can beneath the banana peels and coffee grounds. Not angrily. Just done. 2 weeks later, a Facebook message appeared. From Lorraine Jensen. Subject, just one moment. Message. Megan or Jennifer, if that's what you still prefer. Please just let me explain. Your father's not well. He's been asking about you. We're still your family. I deleted it. Then came a voicemail from an unknown number. Ethan's voice. My brother. He sounded older, rough around the edges. He said Dad had been in and out of the hospital. That things were bad. That they wanted to talk. I don't know if you want to hear from us, he said. But I think you should know the truth about everything. And maybe I owe you more than I realized. I listened to the message 3 times before saving it. Not because I wanted to respond, but because something in his tone, guilt maybe or fear, stuck with me. Ivy noticed something was off the next time we hung out. You're blinking a lot, she said, handing me a bottle of soda. That's your tell. What if they're not done? I asked her. What if they keep reaching out? Then you decide how loud they get to be in your life, she said. And if they don't deserve volume, you mute them. I thought about that for days. Dr. Caldwell and I met later that week. What are you afraid of? She asked after I told her about the messages. That hearing them will make me feel guilty. Or worse. That it'll make me feel sorry for them. Do you think forgiveness is something they've earned? No, I answered. But part of me still feels like maybe I'm the one holding the knife by not forgiving them. You're not holding a knife, Megan. You're holding a boundary. Those words stayed with me. I sat with them. And then I did something that surprised even myself. Called Ethan back. He answered on the second ring. His voice caught when he said my name. Megan. I'm only speaking with you, I said. If this turns into anything else, it ends. Okay, he said. I promise. We met at a diner halfway between Evanston and Madison. He looked older. His hairline had retreated and his hands shook slightly when he picked up his coffee. You look good, he said awkwardly. Thanks. The silence was thick. Until he broke it. They lied, he said. To everyone. They told people you ran away. That they looked everywhere. That the cops took you and wouldn't let you come home. I said nothing. I didn't know what to believe. I was a coward. Yes, I said simply. He nodded. I deserved that. He told me about his own therapy. About his wife Nancy. About how, after their daughter was born, he finally saw our childhood for what it was. Control, manipulation, silence dressed up as love. I don't expect anything from you, he said. I just wanted to say it. That I was wrong. That you deserved better. I finished my coffee. Left a 10 on the table. As I stood, he asked, do you ever miss them? I turned to him, hands in my pockets. No, I miss what I wish they'd been. I left the diner with a strange lightness in my chest. Not relief. Not closure. Just space where something used to be. The kind of space you don't notice until you finally sweep it clean. Back at home, Ivy was waiting on the porch steps. I told her everything. She nodded slowly. You didn't break the chain, she said. You burned it. We sat under the porch light, passing a bag of chips back and forth. I looked up at the stars. And for the first time in a long time, they didn't feel impossibly far away. They just felt quiet. And steady. Like something I could reach if I kept walking forward. I didn't go back to Union Station for almost 10 years. It wasn't a place anymore. It was a shadow. A scar tucked into the shape of a building. Every time I passed through Chicago on field trips or visits, I made sure to avoid it. I took longer routes. I said I hated traffic. I pretended it wasn't a part of the city. But the truth was, I was still afraid of the sound of train whistles. The echo of steps across marble. The feeling of being 12 and invisible. But when I turned 23, something shifted. I had just accepted a job at a non-profit branding agency downtown. One that specialized in social justice campaigns and trauma recovery programs. The kind of place where no one wore suits, but everyone carried a story. I was working on a poster series for a local organization that helped teens escape dangerous family situations, and I needed photos of public places, Stations, sidewalks, parks. I hadn't planned on going back. I just ended up there. It was raining that day, the kind of soft, endless drizzle that soaked your skin without ever sounding loud enough to notice. I stood across the street from the station, watching the glass panels gleam under the clouds, heart pounding like it had years ago. I told myself I could just take one photo. From across the road. No need to go inside. But my feet didn't listen. Crossed. The doors opened with a hiss. And the first thing I heard was the voice of a child crying somewhere to the left. It wasn't loud. Just enough to pull me backward through time. Suddenly I was 12 again. Standing near a marble pillar. Holding a backpack and a $5 bill. Staring at a world that kept moving while mine had stopped. But this time was different. This time I walked forward. I followed the sound of the child's voice and found a little boy standing near the ticket kiosk, looking around in wide-eyed panic. His mother appeared seconds later, running from the opposite end of the hall, out of breath and frantic. They hugged. She scolded him gently. He sniffled. They left. The moment passed. I walked to the center of the main hall and sat on a bench. I looked up at the ceiling, at the light spilling through the windows, at the clock that now read 3:12 p.m. I had been left here at exactly 12:17 p.m., on a June day like this, when the air was warm but the world felt cold. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Just one. For the project. For me. As I stood to leave, I passed by the column. The same one. Someone had stuck a small sticker on the side of it. You are not alone. I stared at it for a long time. Then I took a pen out of my bag and wrote underneath it, "You will get out," and walked away. That evening, back in my apartment, I started sketching the train station. Not how it looked, but how it had felt. I drew the fear first. The blurred faces. The impossible walls. Then layer by layer I added light. The shape of Janet's red glasses. The gentle curl of Ellen's handwriting. Ivy's laugh. Marcus's hands covered in green paint. The courtroom. The lemon tea. The soft purr of Max. The piece took me a week to finish. I called it Departure. I submitted it to a local gallery as part of an art exhibit called Places That Broke Us, Places That Made Us. They accepted it. On the night of the exhibit opening, I stood quietly in the back while people walked past my drawing. Some stared. Some tilted their heads. Some moved on without stopping. One woman stood for a long time. She looked about my mother's age. Her hands were shaking slightly as she read the title. She turned to me. "Did you draw this?" I nodded. "I don't know what it is about it," she said, "but I feel like it's telling me to leave something behind." Smiled. "Maybe it is." She didn't ask questions. Just smiled back and walked away. That night I called Ivy and told her everything. "You really went back," she said. "Like back. I did. And it didn't break me." The next morning I woke to an email from my agency director. Subject line: "Your work. Your story." Inside was a link. The gallery had posted my drawing on their site. It was already being shared by survivor groups, advocacy networks, educators. People were commenting underneath, sharing their own stories. Some with details. Others with just a few words. "Thank you for putting this feeling into something real. I've never seen something that looked like my childhood until now. I thought it was just me." Closed the laptop slowly. And cried. Not because I was sad. But because I finally understood. You can survive something and never go back. Or you can survive something, return and rewrite the ending. Mine was never about the people who left me. It was about the girl who stayed. Who sat still long enough to learn how to stand. And who, one day, walked back through the place that nearly broke her. And didn't flinch. I had just gotten home from the art studio when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but the area code hit me like a slap across the face. Madison, Wisconsin. I stared at the screen for too long. By the time I decided to decline it, the call had already gone to voicemail. I sat there, frozen on the edge of the couch, heart thudding in my chest. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. But I couldn't let it sit either. So I pressed play. "Megan," Ethan's voice cracked. "It's me. I didn't know who else to call. Dad's in the hospital again. It's bad this time. He might not, it's serious. Mom's been trying to reach you, but I told her not to push. I just thought you should know. Even if you don't want to come. Get it? But you deserve to choose. I replayed the message once, then again, each time hearing less of his words and more of the silence between them. It had been over a year since our last conversation. After the diner. After I told him I didn't miss them. After he said he understood. I thought that was the end of our thread. But grief doesn't ask for permission before it pulls. I didn't respond right away. I didn't sleep much that night either. I laid awake, watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. I thought of David Jensen lying in a hospital bed, tubes in his arms, machines measuring what was left of a body that had once been strong enough to carry lumber, hurl words like knives, and drive away without looking back. I thought of the little girl he left behind. And I thought of the woman I'd become. In the morning I called Dr. Caldwell. She didn't say I had to go. She didn't say I had to stay away. She just asked, "What do you need from this, Megan?" I didn't answer right away. Instead I packed a bag. Not because I was going home, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could walk into that hospital, look at what was left of the man who broke me and not feel small. He drove me. We didn't talk much on the way. She just played a playlist of quiet songs and handed me a granola bar when my hand started shaking. "You don't owe them a single word," she said as we pulled into the hospital parking lot. "You owe yourself peace." Ethan met us in the lobby. His eyes were tired. His hair unwashed. He looked like a boy wearing grief for the first time. "He's sedated," he said. "But he's conscious. Mostly." I nodded. "Mom's in the chapel," he added. "She didn't want to see you unless you said it was okay." I didn't answer. He led me through a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and something faintly sweet. Plastic flowers, maybe. My feet felt heavy. My body moved like it belonged to someone else. The door to the room was open. David Jensen lay still, eyes closed, wires crawling across his chest like vines. A monitor beeped slowly beside him. I stepped inside. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not just physically, but spiritually. Like the weight of what he'd built had finally collapsed on him. His eyes fluttered open. Took a second for them to focus. Then he saw me. He didn't speak. His lips parted, but no words came out. I stood at the foot of the bed. "Megan," he rasped. "Not Jennifer. Not Claire. Megan." Waited. "You came." I nodded. Silence. He swallowed hard, grimacing at the effort. "I was wrong." 3 words. Like pulling teeth. I didn't say anything. "Not yet." "I see it now," he murmured. "What I did. What we did." I let the silence stretch. He coughed, wincing in pain. Ethan stepped forward, but I raised a hand to stop him. "Why now?" I asked. "Why not 10 years ago? 5? I was ashamed," he said. "Too proud. Too stupid." I wanted to scream at him. But I didn't. I just looked at the man who once stood tall and terrifying in our kitchen. Who slammed cupboards when I spoke too softly. Who called me dramatic when I cried. Who watched my mother laugh as they drove away. And now here he was. Fragile. Mortal. Broken. "I don't forgive you," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't hate you either." His eyes filled with tears. "I wanted to see you again. At least once." "You have," I said. "But that's all." He nodded, as if he'd been waiting for that. I turned to leave, but stopped at the doorway. "I hope you find peace," I said. "Because I already have." I walked out. Ethan followed. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I didn't do it for him," I replied. "I did it for her." Her. The girl at the train station. We stood in the hallway for a moment. Then he asked, "Do you want to see Mom?" I shook my head. "I'm not ready," I said. "And maybe I never will be." He didn't argue. He just nodded, and for the first time I believed he meant it. Ivy was waiting outside in the car, windows down, music low. I slid into the passenger seat and exhaled. Done. Done. We drove away without looking back. 6 months passed. Fall melted into winter. The first snow came late, wet and loud against the windows of my apartment in Evanston. I stood by the glass with a mug of tea, watching the world turn white, and realized I hadn't thought about them, my birth parents, in days. Not actively. Not painfully. Just not at all. The hospital visit had been the final page in a chapter one never thought I'd close. Not because it fixed anything, but because it told me everything I needed to know. The apology came too late. The regret was real, but regret doesn't build bridges. Just cast shadows. I hadn't heard from Lorraine since. I didn't want to. Ethan sent one message around Christmas. Just a photo of his daughter Emma in a red scarf, standing in front of their tree. The caption read, "She made the scarf herself. Think you'd be proud." Typed a response. "She's beautiful. Tell her I said so." Then I deleted it. Not out of anger. Out of choice. I had grown into a life that no longer needed old anchors. The nonprofit job kept me busy. I launched a side project with Ivy, a collaborative zine featuring survivor stories paired with artwork. We printed the first run ourselves, folded each copy by hand, and mailed them to shelters, libraries, and teen centers across the state. We called it You're Still Here. One morning, I received an email from a girl named Ashley. "Dear Megan, I read your story in the zine. I've never told anyone what happened to me until now. But after reading about Union Station and what you said about choosing yourself, I told my school counselor. I think I'm going to be okay. Thank you." I cried reading it. Not the kind of tears that leave you shaking. The kind that let you breathe deeper afterward. Months continued to pass. One quiet Saturday in April, I sat on the floor of my apartment sorting old sketchbooks. Most were filled with ink and charcoal. Early work. Angry lines. Fragmented memories. But one had pages I hadn't looked at since the week I was adopted. Inside was a folded letter. Unsent. Unsealed. I had written it the night before the adoption hearing. I didn't remember every word, but as I opened it, they came back like a tide. To the people who left me. You don't get to know who I've become. You don't get to claim my strength as proof that your methods worked. I didn't survive because of you. I survived in spite of you. I built a life without your voice in it. And it's better for that silence. But still, I needed to write this because part of healing is naming the wounds. You were my first scar. But not my last. And not my deepest. The deepest one was the day I stopped waiting for you to come back. I folded the letter again and placed it into a fireproof box beneath my bed. Not to save it. Not to use it later. But to remember that once, I'd needed to say those words. And now I didn't anymore. On my 25th birthday, Ellen and Marcus came over for dinner. Ivy brought a cake shaped like a train station. Frosting bricks, licorice tracks, and tiny sugar people walking in all directions. Ellen laughed so hard she cried. Marcus gave me a small square frame. Inside was a typed note. Your voice is not a whisper anymore. I hung it above my desk the next day. Sometimes late at night, I think about the version of me who stood beneath that marble pillar at Union Station. Trembling, waiting, breaking. I want to tell her that she made it. That her tears became ink. That her fear became language. And that her name, Megan Rivers, is one she would grow into with pride. And maybe one day I'll write her a letter too. But not yet. For now I live. Fully. Freely. Quietly sometimes. But never silently again. 5 years later, I returned to Union Station again. But not alone this time. We were hosting a youth creative writing workshop through the nonprofit, partnering with a local shelter that helped at-risk teens. The final session was held in the city, and the plan was to take a train in with the group. They were loud, curious, restless, just like I had been at their age, but with more fire and more hope than I ever remembered having. Ivy was there too, helping corral the students with her usual mix of sarcasm and unmatched patience. She wore her hair in a messy bun that day. Her purple ends faded to lavender, her eyes scanning the group like a lighthouse. Always watching. Always ready. The moment we stepped inside the station, the past brushed against my skin. Not like a ghost, not like a threat, more like a memory that knew its place. I paused near the same pillar. The sticker was long gone, probably peeled away by time or cleaning crews. But I didn't need it anymore. I had it burned into me, the words, the moment, the choice. You are not alone. A girl from the group named Lena wandered toward me. She was 14. White eyes, fierce voice, broken in places she didn't talk about yet. Is this where it happened? She asked quietly. I blinked. What do you mean? Your story, she said. The train station. The bench. The waiting. I nodded slowly. She stared at the marble floor, then looked up. Do you hate coming here? Not anymore, I said. Now it's just a place. But it used to be more. Yeah. She tucked her hands into the sleeves of her hoodie. Sometimes I think if I just go back to where it started, maybe I'll stop being so scared. I looked at her, really looked. Saw the weight behind her words. The edge of something raw. You don't have to stop being scared to move forward, I said. You just have to decide what matters more, the fear or the future. She didn't say anything. Just nodded, the kind of nod people give when something lands too close to the heart. That afternoon, we sat in a circle in one of the quiet corners of the station. The kids took turns reading what they'd written. Stories about running, about waiting, about wishing someone had noticed sooner. Some of them cried. Some laughed. Some just listened, eyes shining. When it was my turn, I didn't read from a paper. I told them a story. About a girl left at a train station. About a courtroom where her voice shook but didn't break. About the people who tried to silence her. And about the ones who taught her how to scream in ink, in paint, in purpose. That girl isn't just me, I said at the end. She's all of us. The ones who were told to be quiet. To stay still. Wait. But we didn't. We got loud. We moved. We ran towards something better. They clapped. Not loud. Not all at once. But it wasn't about that. It was about being seen. After the session, as the group boarded the train, Lena lingered behind. Do you still draw trains? She asked. Sometimes, I smiled. But not like I used to. How? Now they're not about escape, I said. They're about arrival. He smiled back. The train doors closed behind her. I stayed on the platform for a moment longer. Not because I needed to. Just because I could. Years ago I was the girl left at the gate. Today I was the one who brought others through it. The platform was the same. The marble floor, the glass ceilings, the quiet announcements echoing across the hall. But I wasn't the same. I would never be the same. And that was the point. As I turned to leave, a gust of wind swept through the station. A loose page from someone's book fluttered across the floor and landed near my feet. Picked it up. Sentence caught my eye. The past is not the thing that breaks us. It's the thing we rise from. I folded the page gently, tucked it into my pocket, and walked into the sunlight. My name is Megan Rivers. I was once the girl no one came back for. But now, I go back for others. And I always will.